Hello, welcome to Let's Play Jane's Fighters Anthology as we continue with the showcases. So this time, the next on our list is actually the Airbus A310. So we will be running that today, if I can figure out where it put it in the single mission lineup. I think they typically go towards the end. There. That is the wrong mission. I don't know why it did that. I saved it. It had the right name. I guess I'll load it up in here. There we go. Alright, let's try this again. And again, my eyesight could just be a little bad. I did just get off a 4-hour drive just now, so my eyes are probably a little tired, but in any case, here we are. There we go. Now we're in the right plane. I was kind of hoping it would start me in the tarmac, but this is fine too. So I guess let's just get started and, oh, why are you, whoa. Yeah, I'd like you to show me, oh, don't tell me the rudder's broken on this thing. That would be really annoying. Oh, well, I guess that's what we have autopilot for, so. Alright, let's wait until we get to the end of the runway, and hopefully our airspeed will be high enough that we can pull up. There we go, pull up the gear, reduce drag, and probably bring our flaps up too. There we go. So the flight path I have routed for us is we're going basically from the northwestern to the southeastern part of the map. So we're departing from whatever that says because I can't read it. Let's get that text a little bigger. Bournemouth to a town called Nancy. So let's begin our turn as we ascend. And we can probably start getting into the history and facts now. So, the Airbus A310 is a wide-body aircraft designed and manufactured by Airbus Industry, then a consortium of European aerospace manufacturers. Airbus had demand for an aircraft smaller than the A300, the first twin-jet wide-body. On 7th of July 1978, the A310, initially the A300B10, was launched with orders from Swissair and Lufthansa. On 3rd of April 1982, the first prototype conducted its maiden flight, and it received its type certification on the 11th of March 1983. There we go, now we're more or less lined up. So let's go into it. Let's go with like a 7-degree climb here. There we go. Now we're not. Oh, we're still losing speed kind of fast. Yeesh. 5-degree climb? Okay, that. There we go. That should let us keep climbing without losing speed. Tilted a little bit. Yeah, I think I got some rudder drift here, so I'm gonna have to recalibrate after this, because yeah, those circles should be the same and they aren't, so I'll just offset it by there we go, by tilting my aircraft a little bit. So this sounds to me like it's kind of the Airbus equivalent of the Boeing 777. So, keeping the same A-to-rest cross-section, the A310 is 6.95 meters shorter than the initial A300 variants, and has a smaller wing down from 260 to 219 meters squared. The A310 introduced a two-crew glass cockpit, later adapted for the A300-600 with a common type rating. It was powered by the same General Electric CF6-80 or Pratt & Whitney JT9D, then PW4000 turbofan jet engines. It can seat 220 passengers in two classes, or 240 in all economy, and has a flying range up to 5,150 nautical miles. It has overwing exits between the two main front and rear door pairs. In April 1983, the aircraft entered revenue service with Swiss Air and competed with the Boeing 767-200 introduced 6 months before. Its longer range and ETOPS regulations allowed it to be operated on transatlantic flights. For the last delivery in June 1998, 255 aircraft were produced, as it was succeeded by the larger Airbus A330-200. It was available as a cargo aircraft version and was also developed into a military variant, the A310 MRTT multi-role transport, then tanker. So, some background. On the 26th of September 1967, the British, French, and West German governments signed a Memorandum of Understanding to commence the joint development of the 300-seat Airbus A300. This collaborative effort resulted in the production of the consortium's first airliner known as the Airbus A300. The A300 was a wide-body, medium to long-range passenger airliner. It holds the distinction of being the first twin-engine wide-body aircraft in the world. The design was relatively revolutionary for its time and featured a number of industry firsts, making the first use of composite materials on a commercial aircraft. During 1977, the A300 became the first ETOPS-compliant aircraft, which was made possible due to its high performance and safety standards. The A300 would be produced in a range of models and sold relatively well to airlines across the world, eventually reaching a total of 816 delivered aircraft during its production life. During the development of the earlier A300, a range of different aircraft sizes and capacities were studied by the consortium. The resulting Airbus A300B proposal was one of the smaller options. When the A300B1 prototypes emerged, a number of airlines issued requests for an aircraft with greater capacity, which resulted in the initial production A300B2 version. We are getting a little off course here. I also want to increase our climb rate here a little bit. There we go. As the A300 entered service, it became increasingly apparent that there was also a sizable market for a smaller aircraft. Some operators did not have enough traffic to justify the relatively large A300, while others wanted more frequency or lower aircraft mile costs at the expense of higher seat mile costs, specifically Swiss Air and Lufthansa. At the same time, there was a great pressure for Airbus to validate itself beyond the design and manufacture of a single airliner. In response to these desires, Airbus explored the options for producing a smaller derivative of the A300B2. In order to minimize the associated research and development costs for the tentative project, Airbus chose to examine several early design studies performed during the A300 program. The company ultimately chose to prioritize its focus on one option, which became known as the A300B10MC, standing for minimum change. As envisioned, the airliner's capacity was reduced to a maximum of 220 passengers, which was viewed at the time as being a desired capacity amongst many airliners. However, such a design would have resulted in a relatively small fuselage being mated to a comparatively large wing and oversized undercarriage. Such an arrangement would have, amongst other things, made the aircraft consume an unnecessarily larger amount of fuel, as it carried heavier weight than what was otherwise required. Another problem for the program was presented in the form of inflation, the rate of which in the United Kingdom, one of the early members of the Airbus consortium, was around 35% during 1979 to 1980. Eesh, and you think inflation today is bad. This factor was responsible for significantly raising the program's development costs and, as a knock-on effect, increased the per-unit cost of the resulting airliner. During the development of the A300, British manufacturer Hawker Siddeley Aviation had been appointed as a subcontractor to perform the manufacturing of the wing of the aircraft. Shortly afterwards, the British government chose to withdraw from the newly formed venture during 1969. During 1977, HSA subsequently merged with three other British aircraft companies, resulting in the formation of British Aerospace, or BAE, or BAE, as I sometimes pronounce it. By this point in time, the British government had publicly indicated its intentions to rejoin the Airbus program. During May 1976, the French government entered into a series of discussions on cooperation, during which its representatives stated that the placing of an order by British Airways was a condition for the readmission of the United Kingdom into Airbus industry as a full partner. However, both BA and Rolls-Royce had not relinquished their will to collaborate with the Americans in future aircraft endeavors, and in BA's case, procure American aircraft. During the late 1970s, British Airways sought to purchase two separate types of aircraft in development by the American company Boeing, initially known as the 7N7 and 7X7, which would later be developed into the 757 and 767, the latter which being an intended rival to the upcoming A310, as well as the existing Boeing 747. Independent of the British government, BAE commenced its own dialogue between itself and American aircraft manufacturers Boeing and McDonnell Douglas for the purpose of assessing if BAE could participate in any of their future programs, although the company's chairman Lord Bestwick publicly stated the overall aim of the firm was to pursue collaboration in Europe. At the 1978 Farnborough Air Show, Eric Varley, the British Secretary of State for Industry, announced that BAE was to rejoin Airbus Industry and participate as a full partner from 1st of January 1979 onwards. Under the negotiated arrangement, BAE would be allotted 20% shareholding in Airbus Industry and would perform a full part in the development and manufacturing of the A310. The design effort. From late 1977, prior to the Varley announcement, BAE had already commenced work on the design of the new wing at its facility in Hatfield. However, due to negotiations with Britain on its return to the Airbus consortium being protracted, alternative options were explored, including potentially manufacturing the wing elsewhere. At the same time as the British efforts, French aerospace firm Aerospatiale, German aircraft manufacturer Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm, and Dutch-German joint venture company VFW Fokker were also conducting their individual studies into possible options for the wing of the prospective airliner. I did not leave you tilting to the left. There we go. That should be relatively steady. At the April 1978 Hanover Air Show, Airbus exhibited a model of the proposed A310. Its wing area, at 219.25 meters square, was slightly larger than that studied at 209 meters squared. Passenger cabin was 12 frames shorter than the A300, accommodating typical passenger loads of 195 in 2 class or 245 in economy class. However, during the next 12 months, almost every aspect was further... Wow, this really wants to drift to the left today. Alright. However, during the next 12 months, almost every aspect was further refined. On the 9th of June 1978, Swiss Air and Lufthansa developed a joint specification for the aircraft. Within a month, announced that they would place the launch orders. On 15th of March, Swiss Air became the first airline to place a firm order for the type, announcing that it would acquire 10 aircraft with a further 10 under option to replace its McDonnell Douglas DC-9s on its major intra-European routes. Lufthansa was quick to place a $240 million 10-aircraft order. Additional orders from French operator Air France and Spanish airline Iberia shortly followed. As a consequence of the increasingly strong interest in the tentative airliner, coupled with the recovery of the industry during the late 1970s, contributed to Airbus deciding to launch the A300B10, which was now known as the A310, into production on the 7th of July 1978. During the latter half of 1978, an order for 10 A300s was placed by independent British airliner Laker Airways, satisfying Airbus's demand for the placing of a British order for their aircraft. On the 1st of April 1979, Lufthansa decided to raise its commitment for the type to 25 aircraft, along with 25 options. 2 days later, Dutch operator KLM signed its order for 10 aircraft and 10 options at £238 million. On the 6th of July 1979, Air France announced that it had raised its order from 4 to 35 airliners. Other airliners announcing orders for the A310 during 1979 included Martinair, Sabena, and Air Afrique, or however you say the French-sounding version of Africa. Initially, a pair of distinct versions of the A310 had been planned by Airbus, the regional A310-100 and the transcontinental A310-200. The A310-100 featured a range of 2,000 nautical miles with 200 passengers, whilst the A310-200 possessed a higher MTOW and center fuel section, being able to carry the same load a further 1,000 nautical miles. Basic engines offered for the type included the General Electric CF645B2 and the Pratt & Whitney JT90-7R4. At one point, British engine manufacturer Rolls-Royce was openly considering offering an engine for the A310, the Rolls-Royce RB207. However, it ultimately chose to discard such efforts in favor of a smaller three-spool design, the RB211. Production. The range of the A310 exceeds that of the A300 series, with the exception of the A300-600R, which in turn surpasses that of the A310-200. The greater range of the A310 contributed to the airliner being used exclusively by operators on transatlantic routes. The A300 to A310 introduced the concept of commonality. A300, 600, and A310 pilots can cross-qualify for the other aircraft with 1 day of training. Sales of the A310 continued through the early 1980s. On the 3rd of April 1982, the prototype A310-200 airliner conducted its maiden flight. By this point, the type had accumulated combined orders and options for 181 aircraft, which had been placed by 15 airlines worldwide, which had been a relatively superior start than that of the original A300. Over time, it had become clear that the longer-range Series 200 aircraft was the more popular of the two models on offer. During 1979, in response to the lack of demand for the A310-100, Airbus decided to stop offering the lower gross weight model, which had been originally proposed for Lufthansa. As a consequence, none of this variant was ultimately manufactured. During the early 1990s, demand for the aircraft began to slacken. There were no new A310 passenger orders placed during the late 1990s, in part due to the introduction of the newer, more advanced Airbus A330 during this time. As a result, during June of 1998, the last delivery of the A310 was completed. The A310, along with its A300 stablemate, officially ceased production during July 2007 through an order from Iraqi Airways for 5 A310s. Although an order from Iraqi Airways for 5 A310s had remained on the books until July 2008. The remaining freighter sales were to be fulfilled by the new A330-200F derivative. The A310 has been commonly marketed as an introduction to the wide-body operations for airliners based in developing countries. The airliner was replaced in Airbus's range by the highly successful A300-200, or A330-200, which shares its fuselage cross-section. Between 1983 and the last aircraft produced in 1998, 255 A310s were delivered. The A300 and A310 established Airbus as a competitor to Boeing, allowed it to go ahead with the more ambitious A320, A330, and A340 families. As of July 2017, 37 A310s remain in commercial service. Major operators are Air Transat and Mahan Air, with 9 aircraft each. FedEx Express operates 6, and 7 airliners operate the remaining 13 aircraft between them. Royal Canadian Air Force currently operates a fleet of 5 Airbus CC-150 Polaris civilian Airbus A310-300s, originally owned by Ward Air and subsequently Canadian Airlines International after the airlines merged. The aircraft were then sold to the Canadian government and have been converted for use as a primary long-distance transport aircraft as part of the Royal Canadian Air Force's fleet of Royal Canadian Air Force VIP aircraft. Design. The Airbus A310 was a medium to long-range twin-engine wide-body jet airliner. Initially a derivative of the A300, the aircraft had originally been designated as the A300B10. It was essentially a shortened variant of the earlier aircraft, however there were considerable differences between the two aircraft. Specifically, the fuselage possessed the same cross-section, but being shorter than the A300, It provided capacity for a typical maximum of 200 passengers. The rear fuselage was heavily redesigned, featuring altered tapering, which involved a move aft of the rear bulkhead to create additional capacity. This same design change was later transferred back to later variants of the A300, such as the A300-600 and A330-A340 fuselages. The A310 also had a different emergency exit configuration consisting of 4 main doors, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear aircraft, and 2 smaller doors over the wings. The wing of the A310 was redesigned, possessing a reduced span and wing area and incorporating simpler, single-slotted Fowler flaps designed by British Aerospace shortly following its decision to join the Airbus consortium. Other changes to the wing included the elimination of the outer ailerons, which were occasionally referred to by the manufacturer as being low-speed ailerons, and the addition of electrically actuated spoilers. The wing also featured common pylons, which were able to support all types of engine that were offered to customers to power the airliner. From 1985 onwards, the A310-300 introduced wingtip fences, which reduced vortex drag and thus improved cruise fuel consumption by over 1.5%. A limited number of alterations were also performed to the airliner's tail unit, such as the adoption of smaller horizontal tail surfaces. The A310 was furnished with a 2-crew glass cockpit configuration as standard, removing the requirement for a flight engineer. Airbus referred to this concept as a forward-facing crew cockpit. The company had developed the cockpit to significantly enhance the aircraft's man-machine interface, thereby improving operational safety. It was outfitted with an array of 6 computer-based cathode ray tube displays to provide the flight crew with centralized navigation, warning, monitoring, and general flight information in place of the more traditional analog instrumentation and dials, which were used in conjunction with a range of modern electronic systems. The same flight deck had been incorporated into the A300-600, a move which increased commonality between the two types and enabled a dual type rating to be achieved. The same approach was later used on many future Airbus aircraft. In addition to the 2 flying crew, provisions for 3rd and 4th crew seats were present within the flight deck, in case you really wanted that crew chief or something. The A310 was initially proposed with a choice of 3 engines: the General Electric CF6-80-80A1, Pratt & Whitney JT90-7R41, and the Rolls-Royce RB211-524. The A310 was launched with the Pratt & Whitney JT90-7R41 or the General Electric CF6-80A3. Subsequently available were the 53,500 pound-foot CF6-80C2A2 or the 52,000 pound-foot Pratt & Whitney 4152. In late 1991, the higher thrust 59,000 pound CF6-80C2A8 or 56,000 pound-foot BW4156A became available. The A310 was equipped with a modified undercarriage derived from the A300. Landing gear were outfitted with carbon brakes, which were fitted as standard. The structure of the airliner featured a high level of composite materials throughout both primary and secondary structures, increased beyond that of the earlier A300. The A310 is outfitted with integrated drive electric generators, along with auxiliary power unit, which were improved versions of those used on the A300. The A310 is available in 2 basic versions, the medium range 200 and the longer range 300. The first version of the aircraft to be developed was the 200, but this was later joined by the 300, which then became the standard production version of the aircraft. The short range 100 variant was never developed due to low demand. A310-200. The first A310, the 162nd Airbus off the production line, made its maiden flight on the 3rd of April 1982, powered by the earlier Pratt & Whitney JT90-7R41 engines. 200 entered service with Swiss Air and Lufthansa a year later. Late Series 200 models also featured wing fences identical to those of the 300. The first 3 A310s were initially fitted with outboard ailerons. They were later removed once testing showed them to be unnecessary. The A310-200C convertible version, the seats can be removed and cargo placed on the main deck. The A310-200F. The freight version of the A310-200 was available as a new build or as a conversion of existing wide-bodied aircraft. The A310-200F freighter can carry 39 tons of freight for 5,950 kilometers. No production freighters of the A310-200F were produced. A310-300. First flown on the 8th of July 1985, the 300 is dimensionally identical to the 200, although it provides an increased maximum takeoff weight and an increase in range provided by additional center and horizontal stabilizer fuel tanks. This model also introduced wingtip fences to improve aerodynamic efficiency, a feature that has since been retrofitted to some 200 model aircraft. The aircraft entered service in 1986 with Swiss Air. The A310-300 incorporates a computerized fuel distribution system which allows it to be trimmed in flight, optimizing the center of gravity by shuttling up to 5,000 kilograms of fuel in and out of the horizontal stabilizer tank, controlled by the center of gravity control computer. The A310-300C, a convertible passenger cargo version. The seats can be removed and cargo placed on the main deck. The A310-300F, the freight version of the A310-300F. Operators such as FedEx Express acquired modified X-passenger A310s, usually starting with the 300 version. No production freighters of the A310-300F were produced. The A310 MRT/MRTT. The A310 has been operated by several air forces as a peer transport. The A310-300 MRT multi-role transport. However, several have been now converted to the A310 MRTT multi-role tanker transport configuration by EADS, providing an air-to-air refueling capability. At least 6 have been completed, 4 by the German Air Force and 2 by the Royal Canadian Air Force. Deliveries began in 2004. 3 were converted at EADS EFW in Dresden, Germany. The other 3 at Lufthansa Technik in Hamburg, Germany. The A310-0G. One A310 airframe became a scientific research laboratory dedicated to weightlessness. This reduced gravity aircraft is used to realize parabolas, allowing to perform 22 seconds of weightlessness. Operated by No Space, a subsidiary of CNES, French space agency, A310-0G is based at Bordeaux-Marignac Airport. They also performed scientific flights and movie special effects such as for The Mummy 2017, and I am now reminded that that movie exists, unfortunately. Astronaut Thomas Pesquet is one of the Novaspace A310-0G pilots. Civilian operators of the airline include Ariana Afghan Airlines, Iran Air, Mahan Air, and Royal Jordanian Cargo. Currently, while military operators include Royal Canadian Air Force, the French Air Force, the German Air Force, the Mongolian Air Force, Pakistan Air Force, Spanish Air Force, and the Royal Thai Air Force. And currently there are 2 aircraft preserved. One ex-China Eastern Airlines that is preserved at the China Civil Aviation Museum near Beijing Capital International Airport, and an ex-Nigeria Airways A310-222 5N-AUG, which was an Italian restaurant, All Italia, in Gilly, about 5 kilometers south of Brussels Charleroi Airport. It was destroyed in a fire on the 17th of November 2020, however. Alright. So I think that covers most of the aircraft. Top speed, I think that's the only thing that wasn't covered in the bulk of the text. That's important is Mach 0.8 for cruise and Mach 0.84, which is your maximum don't exceed, with a ceiling of 41,100 feet. So, pretty in line with just about every other airliner. I'm not quite sure which variant we have. I don't know, probably the 200, I would think. Maybe the 300, but I don't know. In any case, I think we can do some time compression now, as I will now resume active control over the aircraft, as we are still over 100 miles from our destination, but we can see we have no need to worry about our fuel. Our top speed is a bit slower. You can see we're at 468 knots, but we are also at only 27,000 feet. I'm curious if the game will model it properly if we get up to 40,000 feet, if that will increase our, it'll at the very least decrease our fuel consumption, but it should also increase our top speed since there's less air resistance. Although we're going to have to put in for quite a dive then when we actually get to the airport. There we go. We're at our max altitude now. Yeah, we got it to go a little faster. Well, actually, a fair bit decent faster, but now we're gonna put it in a dive with minimal engine power because we don't want to exceed our never exceed speed here. Let's, as it is, yeah, we're going way too fast. Let's deploy flaps. And the airport should be visible soon. Might be under us. Nope, not under us. So I think we just gotta get down to around 10,000 feet or so and get a little bit closer and we should see it. Put on time compression again. There we go. Should be off the starboard now. There it is. Hey, we're, alright, so we're gonna... That is... Oh, it's not visible from that view? That's interesting. We must have been, like, right at the line where it was visible. Okay, so we're going to, come in from the other side here. And I need more power to the engine, Scotty. I think we've got enough room now, 7 miles out, that we can turn in. And now we just gotta line up with the runway. And obviously no civilian airliner pilot would do a turn like that, because their passengers would be all over the side of the aircraft. But fortunately, I don't have real passengers to deal with. Alright. Let's cut the throttle a bit. There we go. Now we got the gear making some of the, making some wind resistance for us. So now we just gotta line her up and put her in.
Clear to land. Wind at 10 knots, gusting to 19.
Cut the throttle a bit more. Gotta watch we don't cut it too much though. Alright. Gotta bring her in again. There we go, we finally hit the point where we are losing altitude. Gotta be easy on the rudder here, we don't want to spin out. A bit more. Yeah, sure enough, I think my rudder is there we go. Throw on the brakes. And there we go. We are landed. And I have a rudder to recalibrate offline, but we'll taxi the parking first. And we can see this airport does not seem to have been intended for for a lot of operations. It's just kind of there. The player wants to make a mission with it, I think, because it's very bare bones. I don't know, maybe it's supposed to represent an airport that's small in real life. Alright. You may now disembark from your flight. So with that, let's head to debrief. And of course, there's nothing to debrief because all we did was fly around. So that pretty much concludes this episode. Again, it's been a long enough time that I don't remember if it was actually used in any of the single missions. For sure, I don't think it was used in any of the campaign missions, but kind of interesting that they put these civilian aircraft in there, at least as an option for players who are making their own missions, even if they didn't use it themselves. I do appreciate that kind of forward thinking, but hopefully next time we'll get something that isn't just a big bus, but I guess we'll find out, won't we? So with that, thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for next time, and stay safe out there, and we'll see you then.